I'm 17, and I've been babysitting for a couple years now to save up for college. It's usually pretty easy money, you know? Watch some kids, make sure they don't burn the house down, and pocket some cash. But what happened at the Miller's house? I can't even explain it. I'm writing this down because I need to get it out, and maybe someone out there can tell me I'm not going crazy. The Millers moved in next door about 6 months ago. They seemed nice enough, a young couple with twin boys, Alex and Ethan, both 5 years old. Last Saturday, they asked if I could watch the kids while they went out for a fancy dinner. No big deal, right? I'd babysat for them a couple times before, and the twins were usually pretty chill. But this time, God, I don't even know where to start. Everything seemed normal at first. I got there around p.m., and Mrs. Miller gave me the usual rundown emergency numbers on the fridge. Bedtime at 8:30, no sugar after 7, all that stuff. The boys were playing in the living room when their parents left. I remember thinking how quiet they were compared to usual. They just sat there, staring at the TV, even though it wasn't on. I tried to get them to play a board game, but they just looked at me with these blank expressions. It was creepy, but I figured they were just tired or something. When bedtime came around, they went upstairs without a fuss, which was weird because they usually begged to stay up later. That's when things started getting really strange. I was downstairs, scrolling through my phone, when I heard this soft giggling coming from upstairs. It didn't sound like the twins, it was higher pitched, almost ethereal. I called out, asking if they were awake, but there was no answer. Just more giggling. I went upstairs to check on them, and I swear, my heart nearly stopped. The boys were sitting up in their beds, but their eyes were completely black. No whites, no irises, just pure darkness. They were staring right at me, grinning these impossibly wide grins that stretched almost to their ears. I stumbled backward, nearly falling down the stairs. That's when the lights started flickering, and I heard the slow, rumbling growl coming from somewhere in the house. I ran back downstairs, fumbling for my phone to call the Millers, but there was no signal. The TV turned on by itself, blasting static at full volume. I was panicking, trying to figure out what to do, when I heard small footsteps coming down the stairs. But it sounded like more than just 2 pairs of feet. I turned around, and I swear, there were at least a dozen children standing there. They all looked like Alex and Ethan, but wrong. Distorted. Some had extra limbs, others had no eyes, and they were all grinning those terrifying grins. They started moving towards me, speaking in unison in a language I didn't understand. I backed up until I hit the wall, and that's when I noticed the family photos on the mantel. In every single one, where the twins should have been, there were just black, shadowy figures. I don't know how long I stood there, paralyzed with fear. The children kept getting closer, their voices getting louder, the house shaking around us. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, everything stopped. The lights came back on, the TV shut off, and I was alone in the living room. I heard a car pulling up outside. The Millers were back. When they came in, everything looked normal. The twins were asleep in their beds, looking like regular kids again. I tried to tell the Millers what happened, but the words wouldn't come out. They must have noticed how pale and shaken I was, because they asked if I was feeling okay. I just nodded, took my money, and got out of there as fast as I could. I haven't been able to sleep since that night. Every time I close my eyes, I see those black-eyed children grinning at me. I've driven past the Miller's house a few times, and everything looks normal. The twins play in the yard like regular kids. But sometimes when I look at their window, I swear I can see multiple shadowy figures watching me. I don't know what happened that night. Was it all in my head? Or is there something seriously wrong with those twins? All I know is I'm never babysitting again. And if you're reading this and you've experienced anything similar, please tell me I'm not alone in this nightmare. If you are enjoying it, please consider subscribing and clicking the like button to support my channel. Finding an affordable apartment in the city was a nightmare, so when I stumbled upon this steal in an old building downtown, I jumped on it. Yeah, it was apartment 13, but I've never been superstitious. The building manager, Mr. Holt, seemed a bit off when he handed me the keys, muttering something about the previous tenant leaving suddenly. But hey, their loss, my gain, right? God, I wish I'd paid more attention to the warning signs. Maybe then I wouldn't be trapped in this living nightmare. It started small. The first night, I heard scratching in the walls. I figured it was just mice gross, but not uncommon in old buildings. But then I started noticing other things. The bathroom mirror would fog up when I wasn't showering. My clothes would be slightly rearranged in the closet. I'd wake up with unexplainable bruises. I tried to rationalize it all. Old pipes, faulty memory, restless sleep. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The feeling of being watched was constant, like a weight pressing down on my chest. I'd catch glimpses of a shadow in my peripheral vision, but when I'd turn to look, nothing was there. Then the nightmares started. Every night, I'd dream of a woman with long, dark hair standing at the foot of my bed, just staring. Her face was always in shadow, but I could feel her rage, her desperation. I'd wake up gasping for air, the room ice cold no matter how high I set the thermostat. I started asking around about the previous tenant. Mr. Holt would change the subject whenever I brought it up, but I overheard some neighbors talking. Apparently, she'd vanished without a trace about 6 months ago. Left everything behind: clothes, furniture, even her phone. The police investigation turned up nothing. That's when things escalated. One night, I came home to find all the faucets running full blast, steaming hot water overflowing onto the floors. Another time, I woke up to find all my clothes shredded to pieces. The final straw was when I found a message scratched into my bedroom wall. Get out or join me. I tried to leave, I swear. But every time I'd pack my bags, something would stop me. My car wouldn't start. The elevator would malfunction. Once, I even made it to the lobby, only to find myself inexplicably back in the apartment, with no memory of how I got there. Desperate, I dug deeper into the building's history. Turns out, there had been a string of disappearances over the years, all from apartment 13, going back decades. Always young women, always vanishing without a trace. In my research, I found an old ritual, supposedly to banish evil spirits. It was my only hope. I gathered the supplies and waited until a.m. the witching hour. As I began the ritual, the apartment came alive. Furniture flying, lights flickering, that woman's screams echoing off the walls. I finished the ritual, and suddenly, silence. For a moment, I thought it had worked. Then I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned around, and there she was. The woman from my dreams. Only now I could see her face clearly. It was my face. She smiled, and I felt myself being pulled into the wall, becoming one with the building. As my vision faded, I saw my body standing there, looking confused. I watched as my body picked up my phone, dialed a number. Mr. Holt? It's Jessica. I've decided to stay after all. In fact, I think I'll be here for a very long time. Now I'm trapped, another spirit in these walls. and I watch as a new tenant moves in, oblivious to the danger. I want to warn her, but all I can do is scratch at the walls and hope she listens. Because in apartment 13, checking out is easy. It's leaving that's impossible. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when I stumbled upon this quaint gallery I'd never noticed before. The bell above the door chimed as I entered, and the smell of old wood and paint thinner filled my nostrils. That's when I saw it, an oil painting of a Victorian-era woman, her eyes seeming to follow me as I moved. "Oh, you found our hidden gem," the gallery owner said, startling me. He introduced himself as Martin and explained the painting's history. It's been here for years. No one's wanted to buy it, despite its beauty. Something about the woman's expression captivated me. Her lips were curved in a slight smile, but her eyes, they seemed sad, almost pleading. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was trying to tell me something. "I'll take it," I heard myself say, surprising even myself. As Martin wrapped up the painting, I swear I saw the woman's expression change ever so slightly. I blinked, and it was back to normal. Must have been a trick of the light, I thought. That night, I hung the painting in my living room. As I stepped back to admire it, a chill ran down my spine. The woman's eyes seemed to gleam in the dim light, and her smile looked different. Wider, maybe? I shook my head, blaming it on my overactive imagination. Over the next few days, strange things started happening. I'd wake up to find objects moved around my apartment. My cat, Milo, who usually slept at the foot of my bed, refused to enter the living room. He'd arch his back and hiss at the painting whenever he passed by. One evening, as I was reading on the couch, I heard a faint whisper. "Help me." I looked up, my heart pounding. The room was empty, but the woman in the painting, her expression had changed. Her smile was gone, replaced by a look of utter despair. I called my best friend, Lena, in a panic. "Am I going crazy?" I asked her. "Calm down, Jess," she said. "Maybe there's more to this painting than meets the eye. Why don't we do some research?" We spent the next few days digging into the painting's history. We discovered it was painted by a local artist named Eleanor Whitman in the late 1800s. The subject was her sister, Victoria, who had died under mysterious circumstances shortly after the painting was completed. As we delved deeper, we uncovered a series of tragedies linked to the Whitman family. Eleanor's husband had committed suicide, and her children had all died young. The last living Whitman had donated the painting to the gallery decades ago, wanting nothing to do with it. One night, I woke up to the sound of soft crying. I tiptoed to the living room, my heart in my throat. The crying seemed to be coming from the painting. As I approached, the woman's eyes met mine, filled with sorrow and regret. Suddenly, I understood. She wasn't trying to harm me. She was trying to warn me, to break the cycle of tragedy that had followed her family for generations. The next day, I returned to the gallery with the painting. Martin looked surprised to see me. "I can't keep this," I told him. "It needs to be with the Whitman family." It took some time, but we managed to track down a distant Whitman relative living in Denver. When we explained the situation, she seemed relieved, as if she'd been waiting for this moment. As we handed over the painting, the woman thanked us with tears in her eyes. "You've lifted a weight that's been on our family for generations," she said. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. Milo curled up at my feet, purring contentedly. The oppressive feeling that had filled my apartment was gone. I still think about that painting sometimes, about Victoria Whitman and the tragedy that befell her family. I don't know if I believe in curses, but I do believe that sometimes the past refuses to stay buried. I had been living in London for years, working a stressful finance job, and I was just exhausted, completely burned out. I needed a change of pace, you know. So, I did what a lot of people dream about but never actually do. I quit my job, sold my apartment, and bought this tiny, charming farmhouse in the countryside. It was in Gloucestershire, surrounded by rolling hills and picturesque fields. When I first saw it, I thought I'd found my little slice of heaven. The house itself was charming, I guess you could say. It was old, probably built in the early 1900s, with thick stone walls and these beautiful exposed wooden beams. It needed some work, of course, but I saw that as part of the adventure. I was ready to embrace the peaceful life, maybe start a garden, do some writing. You know, all those cliché things city folks think about when they imagine country life. The first few weeks were great. I was settling in, meeting my neighbors. The closest ones were about half a mile down the road, and just enjoying the peace and quiet. But then, things started to get weird. It's hard to explain, but have you ever had that feeling of being watched? Like there are eyes on you, even when you're completely alone. That's how it started for me. At first, I ignored it. I mean, I was alone in a big old house for the first time in my life. Of course, I'd be a little jumpy, right? But then I started noticing other things. Little things, you know. Like, I'd come downstairs in the morning and swear some of my stuff had been moved. Nothing major, just a mug. I was sure I'd left in the sink would be back in the cupboard. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I was just forgetting things, still adjusting to my new environment. But the feeling, that constant sense of being watched, just wouldn't go away. Then came the whispers. God, even now, thinking about it gives me chills. It all started one night when I was reading in bed. Just as I was about to fall asleep, I heard it. A soft, indistinct murmur, like someone was having a muffled conversation outside my bedroom door. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I shouted, asking if anyone was there, but silence. I got up, checked the whole house, but found nothing. No open windows, no signs of a break-in. I told myself it must have been the wind, or maybe some old pipes settling. But deep down, I knew. I knew something was wrong. The whispers continued, always at night, always just out of understanding. I started having trouble sleeping, constantly on edge, waiting for the next occurrence. During the day, I'd see shadows out of the corner of my eye, but when I turned to look, nothing was there. I didn't tell anyone at first. I mean, who would believe me? I had just moved to this tiny, quiet village, and the last thing I wanted was for people to think I was some crazy city girl who couldn't handle country life. But then, about 2 months after I moved in, I made a discovery that changed everything. I was cleaning the living room, dusting the shelves, when I noticed something odd about one of the old books. It was slightly out of line with the others. When I went to straighten it, I realized it wasn't a real book. It was a hollow box, and inside was a small camera. My blood ran cold. I stood there, staring at this tiny device, trying to wrap my head around what I was seeing. A camera. Someone had been watching me. All those feelings of being watched, they weren't just paranoia. They were real. In a panic, I started searching the house. I found more cameras. One hidden in a lamp in the kitchen. Another disguised as a screw in the bathroom mirror frame. There was even one in my bedroom, tucked away in the corner of a ceiling beam. I felt scared and angry at the same time. Who did this? How long had they been watching me? And why? I called the police right away. They came, took my statement, and collected the cameras as evidence. They were as baffled as I was. The cameras were high-tech, not something a novice could easily get their hands on. And the way they were installed, it must have taken time and skill. The investigation that followed was thorough. It turned out the previous owner of the house was a retired electronics engineer. He sold the house through a real estate agent and moved to Spain shortly before I bought the place. The police tried to track him down, but it was like he had vanished into thin air. They checked the cameras but found no recorded footage. Whoever was watching must have been streaming the feed elsewhere. Just thinking about it makes me nauseous. In the weeks that followed, I couldn't stay in the house. I moved in with a friend in London while the investigation continued. The police did a complete sweep of the property, finding even more cameras and listening devices I had missed. They estimated the system had been installed for years, possibly before I bought the house. As for me, I never went back to that house. I couldn't. I sold it as soon as I could legally, with full disclosure of what had happened, of course. Last I heard, it was bought by a paranormal investigation team. I guess some people are drawn to that kind of thing. Thank you for listening. Now try to sleep.